person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London, EC 3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed.
A very good morning to you. It's 9:30 and this is The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV and your radio. Now today, the Prime Minister meets German Chancellor Olaf Scholz in Downing Street. We explore Germany and Europe's reaction to the Ukraine crisis. And is the British public finally over COVID? One poll seems to suggest we might just be. And finally, the fortunes of Rishi Sunak, once the golden boy of British politics, the Chancellor, is in hot water. All that to come after the headlines.
A very good morning to you. It's 9:30. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date on GB News. Now, the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, says the situation in the city of Borodankia is significantly more dreadful than what happened in nearby Bucha, where civilians were killed by Russian soldiers. In the latest development, footage from Borodankia shows an apartment block in the city close to the capital has been razed to the ground. Families looking for relatives watched diggers search through the rubble of an apartment block. Officials reported that 26 bodies were found under debris. Russian forces have fully withdrawn from the north of Ukraine back into Belarus and Russia. That's the latest intelligence from the UK Ministry of Defence. Their assessment is that some of those soldiers were likely to be moved to fight in the Donbass region. The intelligence says Russian forces are still shelling cities in the east and the south of Ukraine, and they are making further advances. In some other news now, the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, has described criticism about his wife's non-domiciled tax status as unpleasant. He told the Sun newspaper she hasn't done anything wrong. Downing Street has denied leaking the information after claims were made in the Telegraph that it had been a deliberate move to smear the Chancellor. Tower Bridge has been closed this morning after climate activists staged a protest. 2 Extinction Rebellion members are hanging from the bridge by suspension cords, and they've unfurled a banner that reads "End Fossil Fuels Now." City of London police say the bridge is closed in both directions while the incident is ongoing. Scientists have successfully reversed the ageing process in human skin cells by 30 years. Researchers say they've been able to partly restore the function of older cells, as well as renew the biological age. Experts say the findings could revolutionise regenerative medicine. You're up to date now on GB News, but on your TV, online and DAB Plus radio. Now let's head back to Tom for this morning's briefing.
Good morning, it's 9:33 and this is The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV and on your radio. Now, the Prime Minister has given an exclusive interview to GB News where he was asked about the last 2 years of COVID restrictions and his ambition for the UK's future. Talking to the Conservative MPs and GB News presenters, Esther McVey and Philip Davies, Boris Johnson said he couldn't rule out another national lockdown.
I can't rule out something, Esther. I can't, say that we wouldn't be forced to do non-pharmaceutical interventions again of the kind that we did, but I think we've learnt a lot, and I think we would really try to go for the earliest possible program of inoculation and vaccination. I mean, that was the
lockdowns again.
Look, I think it would be irresponsible of any leader, in any democracy, to say that they're going to rule out something that could save life. And I believe that the things that we did saved lives. There could be. I've got to be absolutely frank with you, there could be a new variant, more deadly. There could be a variant that affects children badly, that we really need to contain. I'm not going to take any options off the table.
And you can watch that exclusive interview with the Prime Minister in full on the Saturday selection tomorrow at 10 a.m. right here on GB News. Now, talking of the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson is set to host German Chancellor Olaf Scholz in Downing Street today, as the Prime Minister seeks to persuade the Germans and European countries more widely to turn their dependence away from Russian gas. In 2021, Russia supplied 45% of the EU's coal imports, 25% of its oil imports, and around 45% of its gas imports. This year, EU countries are spending 35 times more on Russian fuel than it's giving to Ukraine in aid. So what are the dynamics at play here, and how far might Germany be willing to go? Well, joining me now to discuss this is Dr. Imke Henkel, lecturer in digital journalism at the University of London. Welcome to the programme. It's a really curious situation for Germany, of course. Someone who had led the country for more than 15 years, Angela Merkel, was widely praised for her handling of the economy, yet now her legacy is under the microscope. Germany has been far too independent and potentially close to Russia for some time now. How do they turn it around?
Well, the question is really whether Germany will move towards finally deciding for a ban of Russian gas and oil, and it's difficult to see whether that will happen. But certainly the pressure on Germany to do so is very much mounting. I mean, there always was criticism about these by now infamous Nord Stream 2 pipeline. When it was built, there was also within Germany quite a bit of discussion. And among critics, I'd say also head scratching why actually Angela Merkel was so much insisting on this pipeline, building this pipeline, and actually on making Germany so dependent on Russian gas. We now actually have seen and head of the German state, the president, Frank-Walter Steinmeier, who previously was a foreign secretary, who actually has admitted that it was a mistake by German politicians to create this dependency on Russian energy in Germany.
And yet it's going to be incredibly hard to turn around. We know that Germany is a manufacturing economy, some very energy-intensive industries that, even if there were to be other sources of electricity, still require oil, still require gas to process. How quickly could Germany turn around, and what's the mood of the German public here? Do they see the need to accept maybe some economic pain?
Yes, I think the mood is rising towards that. I mean, you really have to see this gas dependency not just in economic terms, and I think that is at the core of the mistakes that this German government currently continues to make, and that definitely has been made before. And Chancellor Scholz obviously was also part of the previous government. And for far too long, German politicians, and specifically the now Chancellor Scholz, was saying that Nord Stream 2 was an exclusively economic project, and that is, of course, was never true. If you make yourself dependent heavily on in your energy supplies, which are crucial, obviously, also for German manufacturing, from one country, that always has political implication, and now, of course, it very much has, even more so, and. Well, quite a few people would argue foreseeably so. The CDU German foreign politician Norbert Röttgen was interviewed on the BBC this morning, actually saying that rightly that he always has been a critic. You have to see that really in the major context. What we are encountering now is actually what people have warned against certainly since 2008, certainly since 2014, when Russian wolves already invaded previously Georgia, than Ukraine, and since the ongoing war in Ukraine, we have a well, the international power relations and dynamics throughout the world are changing. We are witnessing that the hegemony of the United States for various reasons. I mean, the United States also have withdrawn, but that is pushed back, and that Russia is violently insisting on creating its own influence sphere. And we have to realize that Germany is quite close to the border of this potential influence sphere. Those
Certainly,
countries
it's
were
a
even
very
closer,
febrile
including
situation.
Poland,
No doubt
including
one that we will.
if
No doubt
it
one
does-
that we will
can-
be able
can
to
make-
follow later in the press conference that the Prime Minister will be hosting with Olaf Scholz this afternoon. Thank you for talking us through those issues, Dr. Imke Henkel, of course, German national and former journalist and now lecturer in digital journalism at the University of London. Thanks for talking through those issues. Now, moving on to another issue here. For the first time since the pandemic began, more people want the government to prioritise protecting the economy over limiting the spread of coronavirus. That's according to a new pandemic priorities poll by Kext CNC. Let's take a look. 41% of people now favour protecting the economy versus just 38% who want to prioritise limiting the spread of the virus. That's an enormous drop compared to where things started out in April 2020. Just look at how that graph changes. For those listening on the radio, this is available on GBNews social media. Now, is COVID finally coming to an end, or should we still be cautious about it? Well, joining me now to discuss this is James Johnson, co-founder of JL Partners and senior advisor to Kext Polling. Welcome to the programme. This is a pretty extraordinary poll. I think a lot of people have for some time accepted that the British public has been very cautious when it's come to COVID. Whenever the government's announced a lockdown, they seem to have risen in the polls. Now it might not be the case.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of things behind that. I think there's a lot of fatigue going on. This has lasted a long time. Even back in late 2020, we saw people starting to tire of lockdowns and starting to feel frustrated by them. It's also the vaccine. This has been a big game changer in terms of people's own sense of their personal risk, so that they therefore feel that they can look at other things and prioritise them a little bit more. And it's also about what's going on in the news and going on in people's lives. We've got a huge cost of living crisis going on. We've got the war in Ukraine. When I ask people in focus groups now, what's the biggest issue facing the country? Or, how do you feel things are going at the moment? Very rarely does COVID come up. And I think you see that reflected in those figures.
It's remarkable because whenever the government has taken an easing step or moved to abolish certain restrictions, it has seemed to be unpopular in polling, particularly removing the requirement to self-isolate upon testing positive. That was wildly unpopular. Might the needle now have moved even on that issue?
Yeah, I think it does. And actually, if you look through, and actually that graph you showed there, when it changes, it tends to change after the government brings something in. So the government eases restrictions, whether that was in May 2020 when they first reopened after the first wave, or whether it was in recent changes. And when they loosen up first, the public say, oh, no, we don't like that. We're quite worried about that. But actually, about 3 or 4 weeks after it happens, support then swings behind it. So you see a situation throughout this pandemic, whether it's been closing or easing, that actually the public tend to follow where the government leads them. But I do think now that we're in a very different situation where if the government were to bring in any more restrictions, were to tighten things up again, I think we would see real resistance to that from the public, just as we saw actually in December and January with that Omicron wave. Lots of mutterings about whether there was going to be more restrictions, but actually under the surface of the polls, when you did those focus groups, when you talked to voters face to face, very much a sense of wanting to move on from it. So I think something has decisively shifted in that regard now, notwithstanding, of course, a major game changer or a new variant or something that shook that up. But as we are now, I think we'll see that picture continue to trend upwards.
And how much of that might be to do with the political situation, not just the pharmaceutical situation and, of course, the stupendous success of the vaccine rollout, but, of course, those stories of what ministers, even the Prime Minister may have been up to during those lockdowns. Senior civil servants admitted to having partied during those restrictions as well. Might that have influenced the public here?
I think it has a little bit of a role. I think it makes people sort of, throw their hands up a bit and say, well, what's the point in bothering them? We certainly saw that a little bit after Dominic Cummings' famous trip to Barnard Castle back in 2020, and we've certainly saw that earlier in the year as well, though. I generally think, though, that when people jump on this and say, oh, this means the public are going to stop following everything and stop being careful, it's slightly patronising to the public. Actually, the public are a bit more grown up about this, maybe than some people who comment on this. I think generally they can separate that from actually what they feel they need to do for public health reasons.
Now, there used to be someone in the government who was really quite popular no matter what was going on, and that was, of course, Chancellor Rishi Sunak. He has fallen into some pretty bad press over the last few days, with multiple stories coming out about him and indeed his wife. As we are now less than a month away from those local elections, things aren't looking too rosy for the Conservatives now.
I think the Conservatives are in a really difficult position. This is the first time in this Parliament I've actually wondered whether the Conservatives could actually fall short of a majority at the next election. All last year, Owen Paterson's situation, fights over wallpaper. I would say on GBNews and on other shows, it's not cutting through. It's not actually having an impact in the way that perhaps a lot of the commentariat think it is. But with that party situation in January, that really did seem to change everything. And that has not gone away. I sense that same anger in my focus groups. You see the same level of people saying they want Boris Johnson to resign over it if he's fined than when that question was asked back in January in the polls. That anger is still very much there, and I think that's changed a lot. And as you say, they've also lost now potentially one of their biggest assets in Rishi Sunak's popularity. And add to that mounting frustrations about the cost of living, Keir Starmer doing very well on that best PM tracker in a way that Ed Miliband never did when he was leader, or Jeremy Corbyn never did. I think we are heading towards a really difficult situation. I think the gap between what Conservative MPs think the public think and what the public actually think is widening and widening. I think a lot of MPs are sort of saying, oh, actually, the leadership issue is fine, the current situation is fine, we're going to have a strong narrative against Keir Starmer, we're going to use the culture war stuff, we're going to, beat Labour again in the Red Wall. Actually, with the public opinion, is actually heading in quite a different direction. So I think there's a real danger now that the Conservatives sleepwalk into a very difficult situation electorally.
Really fascinating. Well, the 5th of May is the date of those elections. We'll be watching very closely. But for now, James Johnson, thank you very much for joining us here on The Briefing this morning. Now, the European Parliament on Thursday passed a symbolic vote demanding a total ban on all Russian energy imports into the EU. 513 MEPs voted in favour of an immediate ban on Russian coal, gas and oil, as well as nuclear fuel. Hydrocarbons are Russia's most important exports. So, how much could this actually affect anything? Or was this just a bit of a symbolic move from the European Parliament, not affecting anything at all? Well, let's dissect it now and the politics behind it with Robert Tyler from the Foundation for European Reform. Welcome to the programme. First of all, the European Parliament making a move here, led as it was being cheerled on there by Guy Verhofstadt of Renew Europe, the sort of Euro-federalists within the European Parliament. Is this a bit of showboating, or does it actually have some importance?
Well, as you mentioned rightly, it's a non-binding resolution that the European Parliament passed yesterday in Strasbourg. However, what's important about it is the level of support that the amendment ultimately received. As you could see from there, almost majority of all MEPs from across the political spectrum voted for the amendment that was, although chair-led by Guy Verhofstadt, initially tabled by Conservative MEPs, mostly from Central and Eastern Europe. Now, whilst it's a symbolic gesture, it's also incredibly important, because what it has shown us is that the members of the European Parliament from, I would say, political parties that are in government in a lot of member states where the national government perhaps doesn't support a total energy ban in the same way. And obviously what's important there is that sanctions are the competency of the European Council. So what we're seeing is that MEPs from France and from Germany, where the governments are opposed to energy sanctions, have voted for the amendment, but the governments at the European Council level have remained quite, shall we say, sceptical of introducing a total ban, whereas they favoured in the past a phased-out ban of hydrocarbons.
I suppose this is a fascinating exploration of the different levels of European democracy. Of course, one of the criticisms of Brexiteers for so many years was that European MEPs are not particularly close to the people they purport to represent. No one really could name their MEP in any UK European election. And so to some extent, could this be people being insulated from the consequences? Because let's put in no doubt, stopping all imports of any Russian gas at all would be pretty economically tough for the peoples of Europe. Might the council, therefore, the heads of government of those European countries, be more responsive to democratic concerns and potentially economic ones?
I think it's possible to argue that, but what's interesting is that the council is split. So what you find is that you have an almost direct east-west divide within the European Union, where you find that countries like Germany, Austria, France are much more reluctant to put a total ban on hydrocarbons from Russia. Countries closer to Russia's border, say, for example, Poland and the Baltic states, have already introduced unilateral bans on imports. And it is, in a way, a response perhaps to the geography of the situation. Those countries are closer to Russia, so they feel the threat much more. For example, we've already seen that Poland has taken nearly 3 million refugees from Ukraine. I imagine that the stories that those people are telling when they arrive in Poland have much more of an impact than the economic consequences of such sanctions. I also see that, with these energy imports and the divide, the countries like France and Germany are further away from Russia. They don't see the consequences. And for the longest time, this has been the divide in Brussels. A few years ago, if you had attended committee meetings or attended conferences, you would have heard MEPs or politicians from Central and Eastern Europe taking a much tougher line on Russia than those from France and Germany who have, they don't live with the day-to-day consequences of all of this. I think one final thing that's interesting about this, of course, is the countries that were quicker to respond were the ones where the leaders had already been to Kiev. So we know that Ursula von der Leyen is visiting Kiev today, but a few weeks ago, we had the Polish, Czech, and Slovenian prime ministers visiting Kiev and perhaps got a more direct message. Zelensky yesterday posted on his Instagram feed a very impactful video where he effectively said, when you buy Russian oil, you're not paying in euros or rubles, you're paying with Ukrainian lives. And I think that's the message you get much more from Eastern Europeans than you do from the West.
Really fascinating situation. We'll see what the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has to say about it later today when he speaks in Downing Street. But for now, Robert Tyler from the Foundation for European Reform. Thanks for talking us through those issues there. Now, Conservative MP Tobias Ellwood has called for a review of non-dom tax rules in the wake of revelations about Rishi Sunak's household finances. Mr. Sunak's multi-millionaire wife has acquired non-domiciled tax status, of course, despite living in Britain, which costs her in the region of $30,000 a year, but it means that she avoids having to pay tax on what she earns overseas. Well, let's talk through how this affects Rishi Sunak now with Paul Connew, political commentator and former editor of the Sunday Mirror. Welcome to the programme, Paul. Rishi used to be the golden boy of British politics. It seems like the shine has started to come off him this week.
Yes, how to go from hero to zero and at a pretty rapid rate. Obviously, his poll ratings were nosediving after the spring statement, but I think that's now being accelerated by the revelations about his wife's non-dom tax status. And I think Tobias Ellwood is one Tory who is more in tune with the public's reaction to this than perhaps those supporting Rishi Sunak. And I think the Chancellor's bleating "lay off my wife" interview with The Sun this morning, was the wrong note. I think other Tory supporting newspapers, the Mail and the Telegraph, have taken a more critical line. And it's also interesting, Tom, that those who suspect, that Number 10 may have had a hand in how this story has emerged. Apart from Private Eye, the first mainstream newspaper was The Independent online earlier in the week, and that, of course, is owned by Boris Johnson's close friend Lord Lebedev. Very interesting for those who perhaps buy into intrigue or even conspiracy theories.
That you note that, of course, this story did appear in Private Eye over a month ago. Do you think that it would be right to suggest that there's some sort of get Rishi operation now, pushing out stories that might well have floated around beforehand but are now finding their way into the laps of journalists through some actors or others? I have to note that earlier this week, the Labour Party sent round letters to all members of the parliamentary press lobby listing the 15 tax rises they claimed Rishi Sunak had pushed forward, some debatable, some clear tax rises, and of course sending South Side staffers from Labour HQ wearing Rishi Sunak face masks, holding big tax-raising signs outside the Treasury. It does seem that the Labour Party is pushing this pretty hard.
All's fair in political warfare, and I think it's been a banner from heaven gift for the Labour Party and the Lib Dems and the SNP in Scotland. It's important to remember that Rishi Sunak's wife made the choice to be a non-dom. Most experts say that you can be a resident of or a foreign national, but still voluntarily pay your full tax liability internationally in the UK. And this is what she's chosen not to do. Also, I think the public and the media and some Tory MPs I know are very unhappy about the fact that the Chancellor didn't earlier on make it clear. He did the right thing technically in telling the Cabinet Office and the Treasury about her status.
But he didn't make it public in a statement.
Not the wider public.
To the public, no. I'm afraid we've run to the end of the conversation there, indeed the programme. I suppose I should say that Rishi Sunak, of course, says that his wife pays all tax on earnings in the UK, but not on earnings overseas. Paul Connew of the Sunday Mirror, former editor of the Sunday Mirror, thanks for joining us there. That's it for today. Coming up, it's To The Point with Patrick and Anaya, but first, here's the weather.
Hello, a very good morning to you. I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. A cold start out there, frost and ice fairly widely, but there'll be some sunshine and it'll be a day of sunny spells and showers for many of us. Low pressure's moving away to the east. Another low just skirting the south coast is bringing thicker cloud and will continue to bring some outbreaks of rain to southern coastal counties of England. Now that's kept things frost-free in the far south, but otherwise it's a widely chilly start with some icy patches for northern Scotland. And we're going to see some sunshine in places through the rest of the day, but also showers building. And those showers will continue to be of a wintry mix, so rain, hail, sleet at lower levels, snow over the higher ground, particularly for North Wales, Northern England and Scotland. I think 8 or 9 Celsius for Manchester, Newcastle, 12 Celsius in the south of England, colder still for the north of Scotland, where we'll continue to see a brisk wind from the north. We'll continue to see showers coming through on Friday night, 1 or 2 showers elsewhere, but otherwise, once again, widely clear skies and plummeting temperatures with a widespread frost, some slippery surfaces around first thing Saturday, and a chilly start for all of us. But Saturday looks less windy and less showery. In fact, for many places, it stays sunny throughout much of the day. We'll continue to see some showers for parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland, North West England and North Wales. But the further south and east you are, the brighter and drier it will be, with temperatures rising, and 11, 12 Celsius in the south will feel quite pleasant with light winds and the strong sun at this time of year. 8 or 9 degrees there for Manchester, for Newcastle, for Glasgow. Not feeling quite as pleasant as it turns cloudier through the day with a few showers around. Sunday looks dry and bright for most of us, and it's going to turn milder during Sunday, Monday and into Tuesday.
Tomorrow from 10 a.m, get set for a GB News exclusive interview with Prime Minister Boris Johnson as 2 of his most rebellious MPs put him on the spot. Brexit, COVID, and now the reality of war. How does the Prime Minister look back on the past 2 years? And what can he say about having been so close to death?
I then had a pretty groggy night and went down even lower.
An exclusive interview with Prime Minister Boris Johnson tomorrow from 10 a.m. on GB News.
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering
as their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss, and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children, and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London EC3A 3AA.